Welcome to the Operations Science Podcast, where the art and science of operational excellence come to life through captivating stories of triumph, challenge, and transformation from the front lines of industry. Our distinguished guests, from manufacturing pioneers and medical device innovators to aerospace visionaries, diagnostic lab leaders, and major capital project leaders, unveil the hidden patterns and powerful insights that drive exceptional results in the complex world of operations. Join us on this journey of discovery as we explore the brilliant minds behind the systems that make our world work and uncover the leadership secrets that could revolutionize your approach to operations forever. Here is your host, Ed Pound.
Welcome, everyone, to the Operations Science Podcast, where we explore how the science of working better transforms industries and careers. Our guest today is one of the most respected voices in the world of continuous improvement and lean thinking. He's a three-time Shingo Award-winning author, speaker, and podcast host whose work has influenced leaders from hospital floors to factory floors and everywhere in between. For nearly 2 decades, he's been at the forefront of shaping how organizations think about systems, culture, and the real human challenges of leading change. You may know him from his groundbreaking book, Lean Hospitals, or perhaps from his latest, The Mistakes That Make Us, where he explores how learning from missteps can fuel excellence. He's also a host of Lean blog interviews, My Favorite Mistake, and Lean Coffee podcasts that bring clarity, humility, and insight to the messy real-world work of improvement. He's thoughtful, insightful, and grounded, and whether he's writing, speaking, or listening, he brings a calm confidence that has made him a trusted thought leader across industries. Please welcome Mark Graban. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Hi, Ed. I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. How's your summer going?
Summer is great. It's humid here in the Cincinnati area, but that's typical for here. I've been able to go to some Cincinnati Reds games. Haven't been rained out when I've gone, at least.
All right. They still have a chance. So good luck with that. My Braves are out of it. But enough of that. Let's get into it. You're a recognized thought leader with multiple award-winning books and a massive following. So how did you come into this role, and what does being a thought leader mean to you?
Well, thank you. That's kind of you. I don't know what what that means. I mean, I think at its best, it means, I mean, for one, I think it's a phrase like sensei that somebody else should, maybe choose to just bestow upon you. So, but I mean, I think trying to be a thought leader means not just kind of going with the flow of what is happening with lean or with operations management. I've managed to pick a few uphill battles in my career. One is related to the book that I wrote and published right before The Mistakes That Make Us, or it's actually 2018, the previous book, Measures of Success, which advocates for the use of statistical process control.
Love that book. Yes.
And thank you.
It's on the Operations Science Institute's list of recommended reading. So we're fans.
Well, thank you. It's an uphill battle of, trying to encourage people to use proven statistical process control methods to better evaluate performance measures over time. I think there's really solid connections where that could integrate into lean. And in more recent years, I've really tried to help connect the dots between psychological safety concepts and what leaders need to do to create an environment where people do feel safe to speak up and to participate in continuous improvement, or feel safe to do what a lot of people working in operations science end up kind of being put in the position to do, is feeling safe to challenge, different workplace operation strategies. Like, why do we have too much whip? Or, why, if you get shot down when you're trying to bring up a science-based or evidence-based improvement approach, people get frustrated, they quit, they move on. That's not good for the business. So, those are a couple of things that I've tried to be, on the forefront of. These are not my concepts, but bringing them from others into the world of lean and operations management. I think a thought leader should do that.
Well, I think that the thing about that, and you mentioned a lot, we're going to unpack a lot of that, but, You become recognized as a thought leader because people listen to you. And a lot of times, I think, as you've probably learned over your career, people tend to listen even when you're contrarian because the things that people are doing just aren't working right. So, all of those things you mentioned and what you've done with the mistakes that made us, which we want to move into next, is really just it's kind of seeing the same thing that everybody else sees, but seeing it through a different lens, and that attracts people's attention. So, congratulations to you. Consider thought leader bestowed upon you now. So you didn't have to call yourself that.
I take it as a compliment, so thank you.
Absolutely. So talk about the mistakes that made us. That's very interesting. I mean, I saw when that came out, I was like, oh my gosh, what a great idea. What inspired that? How did you come around to that as a topic?
There's a couple, I think, really strong influences. One is, thinking back to ideas and principles that are core to the Toyota production system and lean when it comes to built-in quality. We rely on mistake proofing instead of demanding that people be perfect. We're all human. We're all prone to making mistakes, and so we need systems, processes, technologies, things that help protect us from committing human error. And that just waiting to punish people and blame individuals is not the best strategy for quality. So I think that foundation is there. And then one of my pandemic projects in the summer of 2020, I mean, I've been podcasting, doing my lean podcast for 19 years. And I decided I didn't feel ready to write another book. A lot of people wrote books during the pandemic. I decided to start a new podcast series. And that ended up being a podcast called My Favorite Mistake. And interviewing executives, leaders, actually two sitting members of Congress, one from each party. I'd like to think admitting a mistake and telling a story about how you grew from that is a nonpartisan issue, I'd like to think.
Well, wait a minute. So you were saying, because I didn't see those, and you're telling me that politicians were actually willing to admit they made mistakes?
I found two.
Wow. Okay. Good work.
That was one thing we talked about is like, why, do you fear that the public or voters would punish you for admitting a mistake? And no, I don't think that that harmed them. So, I was doing that podcast, and I mean, I'd like to think I'm good at finding patterns and connecting dots between things. And, after doing maybe about 100 episodes in the first year plus, it said, well, I think there are some themes and some patterns. And one of my guests actually asked me, well, are you doing this podcast because you want to write a book? So that planted the idea. And I made the mistake of not remembering exactly who that was because it was done after recording. There's no evidence of that. But, so that turned into a book. And, years ago, I started more formally studying the body of work related to psychological safety and the role of leaders in cultivating that. So the mistakes that make us as a book weaves in a lot of those podcast stories. It's a gentle introduction to some lean principles for people that might not want to pick up a book about lean. It's an introduction to psychological safety to people that might not want to pick up a book about that. So, the book's been, I think well received, and it was a real honor to receive another Shingo Publication Award.
Congratulations on that. So when you're talking about this topic with people, I'm always thinking of counter arguments. And one of the counter arguments might be, hey, you're just saying that it's okay for people to make as many mistakes as possible and then they can learn from it. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I've heard sometimes leaders will say, I've heard some people say very directly, like, well, we have to punish mistakes so that gives people permission to make more. Like, but I mean, mistakes are by definition unintentional. If you think people are doing bad things on purpose, that might be called sabotage. You might question, why are you hiring people that would do that? Hell, look, 40 plus years ago at General Motors and all the iconic stories about frontline assembly workers sabotaging cars. I would say, well, that was the function of being in a really toxic work environment, even though people didn't call it that then. That I believe people want to do good work, and punishing mistakes really just drives people to hide them and cover them up. So there is a balance to be found where, I mean, I think of like two broad categories. I call them process mistakes and innovation mistakes. So an innovation mistake, if you're trying to improve a process, if you're doing something new and innovative with a startup or a new project within a company, you have to expect that failure is going to be likely, because if you punish failure, people are going to get super cautious and only try things that are guaranteed to work. That's not how innovation happens. So I think some of the Silicon Valley language around, we need to celebrate mistakes. I think that applies when it's innovation mistakes. Now, process mistakes such as, trying to consistently, I started my career at GM, consistently, cut and machine and polish this hole in an engine block so it's very consistently the same size, or assembling the wrong part onto a car. You don't take that lightly. You put in systems to prevent that from happening. The same would apply, giving the wrong medication to a patient in a hospital. I would call that a process mistake. I wouldn't celebrate those, but I think we have to acknowledge them and have this culture of openness, because again, if people are going to be pressured or feel pressured to cover up problems, we can't do problem solving. And the mistake or the problem or the bad outcome is just going to continue happening whether you're punishing people or not.
The hidden factory. Yes.
Yeah, it would be the hidden the hidden mistake factory. That's a good way to put it.
So that's interesting. When I think about it in an operations science context, there's a couple of thoughts that come to mind. One is the difference between process and innovation mistakes. So, for instance, one of the tools that we help people use, particularly if they're managing projects, is something called commit reliability. Because what you find is engineers will say, just leave me alone, I'll figure it out. And then what happens is they're all doing their own thing. There's not good coordination. And so the idea with commitment reliability is saying, hey, let's get together every week and decide what we're going to do next week, and then coordinate about who's doing what. And literally, having sat in meetings with people who are just starting this, the engineering manager is going, wait, you're not doing anything this week. This guy's overloaded. Well, why don't you two guys work together? So that kind of thing comes on. So you want commit reliability to be as high as possible, because it's essentially, particularly for knowledge work, it's like forecast accuracy. And, the worse your forecast accuracy is, the more variability you have. That tends to present itself in terms of longer delays. Okay. So when you're doing commitment reliability, if you're working with engineers, you wouldn't expect them to have a commitment reliability more than, say, 80%. Because to your point on innovation, if you tell them they can't make any mistakes about what they're doing and they're trying to discover new stuff, they're going to not make mistakes, and then they won't discover new stuff, which is, it works exactly against what they're trying to do. Now, if you're working with a construction crew out on a job site and you're doing commit reliability for the next day, and you have to get tasks done, well, you would expect it be a little bit higher, because they should have a better grasp of what's going on. And so that's a really good distinction between innovation mistakes and process mistakes. And they're both sources of variability, and you should expect different levels of that variability depending on what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I think just we have to be really careful and reflect upon how counterproductive it is when we punish either type of a mistake. We can acknowledge that the impact, in particular, of a process mistake is bad, but let's learn from it and let's get better. I think when it comes to innovation mistakes, the idea, I didn't say I don't like the Silicon Valley language you hear sometimes. So fail early, fail often. I would rather,
Burn through a lot of money.
but if you fail early, fail small and learn and adjust and move forward, failing early leads to success. You can iterate your way to success. That's the one of the chapter titles in the book. You don't want to iterate your way to eventually giving the patient the correct dose of the correct medication, unless it's a but see, there's a difference though, to be fair, between a diagnostic process, like where there are times where you have to figure out almost through trial and error what the right dose is. But once that dose has been determined, it should be given reliably, the right time, the right dose, the right medication. So I think, it's contextual.
Definitely. So, what are some of the best practices you've seen for leaders when they're trying to create this psychological safety in the workplace?
I mean, I think of three pieces that fit together. One is leading by example. I mean, I think it's incredibly powerful, and I've seen this demonstrated in a lot of settings where a leader who's willing to admit mistakes earns a lot of trust and I think respect from the people who work for them. Saying, I was wrong, I made a mistake, I might be wrong, so let's go test this idea. Like being less certain as a leader, I think is a very helpful way to lead by example. And then I think once you've demonstrated and modeled these behaviors, then I think you've earned the right to encourage others to follow your lead. So it's do as I'm doing, not just do as I say. So, encouraging people to follow your lead. And then when they do, you had better reward them for doing it. Right. So, and I think reward is a powerful word, not just tolerating that somebody may admitted a mistake or tolerating that somebody disagreed with you as a leader. You have to reward it. And, an environment of psychological safety, like a lot of things, I think there are parallels to trust. It might take a long time to build, but then a mistake or a misstep on the part of the leader could really, kind of topple that culture that you've built slowly. It could topple really quickly. But I think if you're a leader and you've made a mistake, again, admit it. And I think that rebuilds, that gains back some of that trust, or at least it makes things better than if you refuse to admit the mistake and double down on it and tell people you shouldn't be upset or things like that.
Yeah, people know what's going on. I mean, you're not fooling anybody.
I think friendly advice to a leader would be like, if you think your employees think you're perfect, you might want to check that. They probably know that you're not, because guess what? You're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. Don't try to have that air of infallibility. I don't think that helps.
So lead by example. The other one was reward.
Well, in the middle, encourage. So I think if you just encourage people to speak up, to challenge the status quo without doing it yourself, people might not believe you when you say it's okay to say, I don't know, for example. So yeah, modeling, encouraging, and rewarding are the three things I think about.
Sounds like good advice. Okay, so you've written a lot about mistakes, and I know you've probably gotten this question before, but I'm very interested in two mistakes. One, the most interesting mistake that's not yours that you've heard in your discussions, because I know you've had a lot of podcasts with people talking about their favorite mistake. And then one, a memorable one from early in your career that helped you grow.
Yeah, there are so many great stories in the podcast and in the book. But let me connect a couple stories together. So I've interviewed three leaders, founders, presidents, master distillers, etc., of bourbon producer. So I live here in northern Kentucky. One of these producers is in Texas, which has been home for a lot of the last 20 years. So I enjoy going to factories, and that includes going to a bourbon.
Yeah. Does that include taste testing?
Well, yes, that's the only factory where you're allowed to taste. The smells are generally very good compared to some factories that have a distinct, maybe bad odor. But there are stories, kind of three similar stories from Garrison Brothers Distillery in Texas, Glens Creek Distilling in Kentucky, which is actually run by a former Toyota guy, David Meyer, and Jephthah Creed Distillery that's also in Kentucky, where mistakes led to an innovative product, like trying to make the best of a mistake. So in the case of Garrison Brothers and Jephthah Creed, it was actually a vendor that delivered the wrong type of corn. And I think then it becomes like, hey, free corn. We're not just gonna throw it away. Let's distill it and let's see what happens. Now, the one thing that's really interesting about bourbon, you think about time for your quality checks. You can distill the bourbon and it comes off, clear as the water that's in my coffee mug. And you can taste it. But then you're having to make a prediction of, well, how is that going to taste in 4, maybe 5 years, right? So you can do a small experiment, but then there's the time factor. There's a long time where it would be considered whip because the cycle time is by nature very long. But I love how in those two examples that the delivery mistake, somebody else's mistake, they turned it into an opportunity, into a differentiated product. For Garrison Brothers, that was using white corn instead of yellow corn. For Jephthah Creed, that was a matter of using kind of a heritage red corn. And then at the other one, at Glens Creek, and this was the Toyota guy, Mr. Process here, Dave Meyer, great guy. He was co-author of 2 of the books with Jeff Liker in the Toyota Way series. Normally a bourbon would be made from at least 51% bourbon, a high percentage of rye, and a little bit of malted barley. Well, they went to go make bourbon one day, and David realized he had forgotten to order more rye. They had run out. So they could have sat and waited and done nothing until they had more rye. And instead they decided to experiment, let's try doing 100% corn. And that became an extension to their product line. It wasn't, the first time anybody had ever done that, but it's still, pretty unusual. And they probably wouldn't have tried that, if not for that mistake. So I just love these kind of, maybe, serendipity, happy accident sort of stories. That's one category of, the favorite mistakes.
All right. How about yours from early in your career?
Oh, yeah. A lot of mistakes. I mean, I think one mistake that I repeated a couple of times, and I've had guests say the same thing. Like, oh, ideally we would learn from a mistake the first time we do it. Sometimes it takes a second time to really clue in and say, oh, okay, a lot of this was on me. So, I think of, times at General Motors, and then a time even almost a decade later, at Honeywell. I was still very much in that engineer mode of thinking like, well, I've been assigned something. I need to solve the problem. I need to do it. I mean, look, I knew I should be trying to get input from people. So to be fair to myself, though, neither culture was really one that fully embraced getting operator input into things. Like if at GM, I was being asked to work on safety projects that were for the benefit of the frontline workers. At Honeywell, I was given a project to try to increase production while also reducing cycle time. So that was looking at lower batch sizes, setup time reduction, things like that. But in those cases, I learned that even if as the engineer I came up with the technically correct solution, it meant nothing if the people who had to use those solutions on a day-to-day basis didn't have input, if they weren't involved in the process. So I think one of the mistakes was not pushing harder, not pushing back more on management to say, look, I know here's the catch 22, and I'm sure you've seen this, Ed. We're already behind. We're not shipping what the customers need. And you're saying you want me to shut down production for 2 hours to get people's input on things? No, it's your job to,
That's a hard sell.
yeah, it's your job to fix it. Go fix it. I'm like, well, if we shut the line down for 2 hours and that was a good investment in future productivity, I mean, I should have tried harder to make that case. So the one thing I've tried to learn from that now as a consultant is I don't want to get hired into a situation where somebody says, no, you can't bother the people doing the work. You're the expert. We're going to hire you to come up with the solution. Like that's kind of, it's just a waste of everybody's time. You might get some benefit, but it's certainly not going to give as much benefit or the kind of sustainable benefit that you would hope to achieve.
Well, that's interesting because that kind of speaks to exactly why we're doing what we're doing with the Operations Science Institute. Because I worked a long time selling consulting and trying to sell software, and that's a whole kind of sales cycle that you have to go through. But the idea of what we're trying to do now is basically just to provide training because, to your point, if people understand operations science in a way that they can apply it and it's in a psychologically safe environment, really you just stand back and watch them go. Now, you might be guiding them because, as you mentioned, technically you understood it and you know what's going on, but having them understand the concepts, you just kind of turn around and coach rather than leaving a solution and taking your helicopter home.
Yeah, and, I think there's another thing I've learned along the way, which I wouldn't have gotten exposed to, I don't think, if I wasn't working in well, some of it was working in healthcare. One of it was actually a chance encounter with somebody at a lean startup conference, a chance encounter with a social worker who was becoming an entrepreneur in her space. And we were talking at a networking event. And she told me about an approach called motivational interviewing, not to be confused with, let's say, motivational speaking. But motivational interviewing has its roots in clinical counseling and addiction counseling, where some of the key lessons are telling somebody they should change. It's that doesn't work. Telling somebody so then I've heard people in different workplaces say, "Well, okay, yeah, yeah, we're not going to tell them what to do. We're going to tell them why it's important to change, and then we're going to involve them in figuring out what to do." Well, people might not agree with the reason why to change. So what proves very effective, whether it's in counseling or in workplace settings, is to ask instead of tell. Like, if somebody and I think, like, one example, I think this is kind of textbook motivational interviewing, if I can, a quick story. A nurse manager at a client was, admittedly struggling. I think I had been sent to go talk to her because she was struggling. She wasn't doing her daily huddles. They were getting canceled because they were in crisis mode, and, I went to talk to her. Look, I'm a consultant, I'm a coach. I'm not there to chew her out. If they had wanted to do that, they would have done that. But she said, I want to do them, but I can't, and I feel stuck. And that's an important thing to lean into, right? She wasn't being resistant to change, and I hate throwing that label at people. That's very blamey. But as you learn in motivational interviewing, she had reasons to do it. She had reasons to not do it, and she was kinda caught in the middle, and the one lesson from motivational interviewing was for me to ask her, not to lecture her of why it was important to do these huddles, but to ask her, "Well, like, it sounds like this is important to you." Truthful affirmation on my part. "It sounds like this is important to you. If you think about it, like, what are the top 3 reasons why you wanna do it?" And she thought, and she's like, "Well, it'll better engage my team. We're gonna have more participation. We're gonna have more improvement." But, like, she saying those things out loud.
Well, she had thought through it. I mean, she wasn't sitting over there just in her corner, just saying, "No, I'm not going to do it." She had her own reasons.
And so there's science, there's some science behind the idea of saying it out loud being helpful, and then, kind of asking her, you have to help someone strengthen that commitment to change before you start saying, "Well, what do you think you might do differently?" But just even having her say those things out loud, I could see her body language change. And she's like, "Yeah, you could tell." I forget exactly what she said, but it was, she felt more confident that she could prioritize that. Now, if you ask people, what are the barriers? What are the reasons why you can't do it? That just reinforces the not doing it. So you have to be careful and not get some of that motivational interviewing interaction backward. But I think that's an important lesson because I think as an engineer and in business, we're taught to focus on the barriers instead of, I think, focusing on strengthening the motivation.
They ought to train motivational interviewing to every couple before they get married. I think I think that'd be very, very helpful in that regard.
if I'm addicted to, leaving my socks laying there in the middle of the floor, you know, have a conversation of
Why is that a good idea?
my wife asking, "Honey, why is it important to you to pick the socks up off the floor?"
Yeah, that's funny. All right, so let's switch topics a little bit. I know, and most folks might not know, but you went to Northwestern, industrial engineer, and you took factory physics from Spearman and Hop. Did you have both of them?
No, it was Spearman. Wally Hop was actually my faculty advisor my freshman year.
Awesome.
So I got to know him a little bit. But yeah, I was taking the class with Mark Spearman. It was one of my favorite classes. It was one of my most impactful classes. He made the topic fun,
Yeah, he did. He did.
and we were using, or he does. I mean, I should say but when he was teaching that class, he made it fun and interesting. And we were using, I still have it somewhere, a pre-publication edition of Factory Physics. It was probably kind of like a final draft that hadn't been typeset officially by the publisher. It was like,
I don't know if you can see it. I'll pull mine out. Did it look like? Can you see that?
oh, it was spiral bound. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was that yeah.
That's it. That's my version.
I think it was industrial engineering C35 or whatever they called that at Northwestern. Yeah, I mean, I am so grateful to have had that exposure, to factory physics, operation science concepts there in college. Now, the challenge then was going out into a working world where, for as much experience as they had in operations, they didn't really understand the operation science, and that was getting companies in trouble. And then I was trying to speak up and be, a diligent, good engineer, and sometimes people didn't like being disagreed with.
Yeah, it is a conundrum because you can it's the science is the science, right? It's kind of like arguing with gravity. But I'm going to come back to that for just a second, but I just realized this weekend. So Wally has retired. I don't know if you knew that or not, but Wally has retired. There's actually a conference there pretty much in his honor, um, at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor this weekend. I'm going up there. Me and Jeff Bell and Mark will be there, so I'll be sure. I didn't realize he was your advisor, so I will be sure and give him your regards.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. I don't know if he recognizes my name anymore, but yeah, it's been a long time. I managed to keep in touch, with Spearman. He was a guest on my Lean podcast at least 15, 17 years ago, and, yeah.
Yeah, he's still at it. He's retired too, but we're literally grinding through the last chapters of Operation Science Applied, which will be published in a few months. So, but anyway, I brought up the topic because I know you've been a long journey through a lot of different areas. You've done healthcare, and you've done all sorts of different industries. How has that early Operation Science, factory physics training influenced your work?
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see how it applies in so many different settings. And so you made me sound a little younger than I am, I think, with the introduction. This month, as we're recording, July 2025, marks 30 years since I started my first job out of undergrad at General Motors. And next month, August, and I do look that old because of the gray hair, but August will mark 20 years since I started doing consulting work, in healthcare. So there's a couple big round numbers to kind of, make you stop and think and reflect. But, even going in the hospitals, my goodness, one of the biggest causes of patient flow problems, which can have an impact on clinical outcomes. It's not just people being annoyed that they're waiting too long. In certain situations, like the amount of time you wait could be the difference between life and death, or having a relatively easy recovery from something versus a very bad recovery. And one of the biggest problems, and you learn about this in factory physics, is the problem of aiming for 100% utilization.
Yeah, that's so common.
Aiming for even 90, it depends on the amount of variation in the system and healthcare. I'm preaching to the choir here to you and probably the listeners, but in a high variation environment, and healthcare is high variation environment, even aiming for 90% utilization of people or operating rooms or MRI machines, you get the cycle time and whip explosion. And it's tempting for people to say, well, that MRI machine is very, very expensive. It needs to be running 100% of the time. Like, if you go back to, say, the theory of constraints, which I learned about, I think more at, well, no, we read The Goal,
Oh, sure. That was part of the class. Yeah.
and GM was exploring theory of constraints. But so, okay, if the MRI machine really is the bottleneck, run at 100%, but then you would better design the rest of your process flow to ensure that that resource is as fully utilized as possible. But healthcare struggles, and this is not their training and their education, to think about an end-to-end process, or what we might call a value stream. And so the goal might be 100% utilization, but because the process end to end isn't designed well, and you've got silos and poor communication, and one project I was working on with a client, the MRI machine was actually only running about 35% of the time. And patients, this was at a children's hospital, were waiting like 12 to 14 weeks to get an appointment. And so part of it for an MRI, so this was the conundrum. Like, if the machine's only running 35% of the time, why are people waiting 12 to 14 weeks? It was really more about the scheduling algorithms. And they were so, in a caring way, they didn't want patients or their parents to arrive and sit and wait for 4 or 5 hours in the waiting room. Oh, okay, good. That's fair. But they were starving the system of WIP on a daily basis. And we had to have these conversations of, well, sure, okay, we don't want people to wait 4 or 5 hours. We're not going to schedule 100 people when we can only do 50 scans and send the other 50 to come back the next day. That wouldn't be caring. That wouldn't be right. But we got to find the balance of, like, and thinking through what's worse, possibly waiting 90 minutes because there's variation and delay, but you get your scan and your diagnosis, or wait 12 to 14 weeks and come in and have no waiting time in the waiting room. And they were solving one problem to the detriment of probably the real problem, which was getting the diagnosis to the referring physician and to the patient and to their family sooner than later. And it's not even, I mean, there was the one a dynamic of trying to diagnose or confirm a condition more quickly. The other is maybe ruling out a condition. And you think, if a family and patients are scared and worried for 12 weeks, is this cancer or not? And you could find out, no, it's not. In We got those waiting times down to very consistently, and they maintained this for years, down from like 12 weeks to 2 to 3 weeks.
Oh, that's awesome.
And they got those utilization rates up to something more like 60 something percent. So you can start to do the math. If you're doing more cases per day, patients aren't going to have to wait as long. The flow was better. We weren't asked.
Hospital makes more money.
Well, there's that too. But then that maybe, let me connect the dot real quick to motivation. If we had gone to the staff and tried to say, "Oh, we're going to work on this project because of the huge revenue boost," nobody would have cared. But thankfully, it was a win-win-win, where we could frame it as, patients will get care more quickly. The day actually goes by more quickly and is more fulfilling when you're providing more care to more patients, instead of just sitting there waiting for your next thing to do. And it also happened to be financially beneficial to the hospital. But the one senior VP that was the sponsor of the project, he was looking at that, but it was very savvy on his part to never mention the financials to the employees. Now, you might say, like, "Oh, that sounds like really patriarchal," or no, is that the right term? Of like, "Oh, treat your employees like adults and help them understand the business." But that could have been maybe more of a long term type of thing to help get people on board with. But they tapped into, the very real motivations, which was mainly patient care.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, and that's actually the reason that we've progressed the term from factory physics to operation science is because it does apply everywhere. I mean, construction and engineering projects, engineering development, where people who typically think like, oh no, we don't make stuff, so we can't use those concepts. Well, all those design tasks that you have to do is your whip, and your engineers are your resources, and the same sort of thing applies. And so we've just seen it applied everywhere. And so the term operation science just makes a good general term, because now people aren't saying, oh, we don't have, we're not a factory. Well, everybody's got operations, and most everybody likes science-based solutions.
They say that in healthcare, so it's a great opportunity. Even the phrase lean, when people realize like, oh, this comes from lean manufacturing, even if you call it lean healthcare, that's a sticking point.
So that's an interesting. I'd like to get your insight on this. One of the things we discovered, and I think it's kind of taking a historical perspective and looking back over the last 60, 70 years, because there wasn't sort of a recognized science of operations. We've been through these, I wouldn't call them fads, but phases. The computer came out, then MRP was great. And then people were like, oh, MRP, because people were trying to schedule exactly and trying to schedule 100% utilization. And so they thought the problem was the MRP scheduling. So let's like, oh no, let's reduce WIP and let's do like Toyota and let's be lean. And then Six Sigma comes along and theory of constraints is in there. And so my observation is that it seems like that people have it in their mind that there is one, you might call it best practice or continuous improvement practice or another. And there's these war of continuous improvement initiatives. And then we've seen this a little bit, when you bring operation science in, people go, oh, now I got to stop doing lean and I got to start doing operation science. I don't know if I'm ready to fight that battle. It's just been, I don't know if you've seen that sort of thing, because you've had that in your back pocket the whole time, right?
One version of that dynamic is you come into a hospital and you start trying to teach or help people embrace lean principles, and people roll their eyes and oh, it's another program of the month, program of the year, or executives might lament, boy, we tried TQM and that didn't work. We tried Six Sigma,
Exactly.
that didn't stick. And like, yeah, I've got a book on the shelf. It's not right here behind me. A book written probably in the 90s, Why TQM Fails and What You Could Do About It. That exact same book, if you did a copy, search, replace, could be Why Lean Fails and What You Could Do About It. So, if you're going to, and I think you can integrate these philosophies. So one thing I've seen in Japan is the hospitals and factories there, whether it was Deming era or later, they still use the language and the practices of TQM, total quality management. And they didn't give up on that, but I've gone to organizations and they may have played around with Six Sigma and started incorporating some of those deeper statistical methods into their TQM projects. But then what I've seen more commonly is, the classic TQM project is a group that gets together maybe weekly or on some frequency, and these might be 6-month long projects. Oh, not everything needs to be a 6-month long project. Not everything needs to be a week-long Kaizen event. So maybe the hospital starts doing Kaizen events, and then like organizations that were doing nothing but Kaizen events, they learn, well, not everything needs to be a week-long Kaizen event. It can be a small Kaizen, a small PDCA cycle. And, I think you can incorporate and meld. I'm generalizing, but the Japanese organizations that I've visited that tend to be the more successful ones, I think have layered and built upon, instead of throwing something out and starting from scratch. And what I've tried to do with SPC, I had somebody once push back and say like, oh, so you're getting into Six Sigma? I'm like, no, SPC is 100 years old.
Right. You're just describing the process and the behavior of the process and the limits of the process. Right. And that's actually,
You can incorporate statistical science into your lean practices.
right. And that's the whole, yeah. I think there is some hope there. The way we're approaching it is trying to say, look, we're starting from first principles. right? You have variability. To try and synchronize demand and transformation, presence of variability. You can either have a capacity buffer, an inventory time buffer, and you got to figure out how all that works together. How does that apply to your organization? That's not lean. I mean, are you doing lean? Okay, great. Let's incorporate that into the lean. So I think there's hope. I think there's hope. We're going to keep plugging with yours and the support of a lot of other good people out there working. I can't believe it, but we only have 10 minutes left. I can't get out of here with asking you, one, how do you see the role of AI as it's emerged so rapidly in the work you're doing in the future of improvement work?
It's a really interesting question. I wouldn't expect AI to do the problem solving for me. I think there's a lot of potential, so I'm wearing polo shirt today from Kinexus, a software company that I'm working for, and we have customers that have a database of think of a health system in UMass Memorial. Let me give a shout out to them, UMass Memorial Health. They have a database of I think it's definitely well over 100,000 employee ideas. And this is not, you think of like, how can AI help you better search? Like we have some of that functionality in KaiNexus, but you could make that so much better of being able to tap into kind of the collective documented improvement work that others have done, of like how powerful that could be, just to ask questions instead of having to put together very specific search phrases. I think AI could help us with that. I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there on the front line doing work that that would be great to talk about in the podcast. I'm kind of speculating just a little bit.
Yeah, our first guest on the podcast, Mike McBride from Delta Tech Ops, was just talking about how they incorporated AI and were able to reduce their inventory by tens of millions of dollars. And so, there's definitely big opportunities out there. And one of the things we talk about with Operation Science is, even so, it will do all that, but you need to understand the basic relationship so when it's hallucinating or just blathering information, that is really not telling you anything. But it is definitely going to have a huge impact, and we're already seeing that. So,
Yeah, I would hope that AI, like any technology, is helping people be more effective instead of just replacing people. It's the same technology challenge where, it worked at GM, and long-standing, century-long labor battle between management and the union, and a lot of managers just didn't like the people. And, the GM CEO of the era, Roger Smith, had a vision of a lights out factory with no workers. And like, that sounds really bleak, where, Toyota has a different philosophy of using technology to help people and to, shift people into other work. If work is unsafe, you want to automate it. If the quality would be better through automation, then great. But, kind of protect people's career and paycheck, even if their job changes. So, you may let people retire. There's a general lean lesson there. Like, don't drive layoffs using lean, because then people won't want to participate. But as people retire, as there are shortages of people, how do you supplement people? That would be my encouragement, of let's go looking for solutions that help people perform better and help the organization perform better, instead of just replacing them with AI.
well, expecting to do that, I think, is unrealistic. I saw something that has really stuck with me. I forget where I read it, but it says people are not going to lose their jobs to AI. They're going to lose their jobs to people who know how to use AI. And
I've heard that, and I think that's very true.
I think that's pretty good. All right, let's in a few minutes remaining. Let's go way back. Where'd you grow up? Siblings? What influenced you early on as a kid to be where you are today?
So I was born in Dayton, Ohio. Especially in my first 15, 20 years in my career, I changed jobs a lot. My dad was an electrical engineer, worked for General Motors 40 years before retiring. So I grew up, he got transferred when I finished kindergarten to Livonia, Michigan, Detroit suburbs.
Yep. I've lived in Brighton.
Yep, not too far. So graduated high school there. But I think part of, formative things that I saw, my mom, let me go back to where my parents were born and raised, because this is important from a manufacturing standpoint. Well, my dad first. So my family came to the US from Eastern Europe, Slovakia, and Austria, Hungary. Late 1890s, steel mills, northeastern Ohio, Youngstown area.
Yep. Yep.
That's why my family came over originally, was for those jobs. And as a kid in the 80s, we're driving to my grandparents' house. I'm like, why does that valley have all of these ruins of buildings? And oh, that used to be a steel mill. What's a steel mill? And a lot of people worked there. And like, well, why are those jobs gone? And there's a long discussion to be had about that. And then my mom grew up in Flint, Michigan. So then you're driving, so another very economically disadvantaged place by that point, because a lot of the GM jobs were no longer there in Flint, and kind of made famous back to Roger Moore, or no, Roger Smith. I'm confusing him with James Bond. Hopefully I said Roger Smith earlier.
You did say Roger Smith earlier. Yes.
But I was also thinking of the film Roger and Me by Michael Moore.
Michael. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah. Okay.
Chasing down Roger Smith. I think that struck a chord with me, of like, what happens to a city or an area when there's massive job loss. It's sad. What could we do to try to avoid that or mitigate that?
So how old were you when you saw that? You saw the valley of ruins of the steel mill?
Probably, I don't know how old I was when I first asked about it, but I mean, in the 80s, as a teenager, and we'd go visit my grandparents in northeastern Ohio quite a bit. And like,
Well, so that made a big impact as a kid, right? And kids are very empathetic, right?
My grandpa was the first generation to have a job like outside of the steel mill. And then my dad was the first generation to go to college.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's that classic American story of, kind of working your way up. And, my grandfather didn't work. I think at one point he maybe had a part-time job at one of the GM plants, but he was an auto mechanic. And so, obviously very automotive based. But as, as the economy around Flint suffered, that affects everybody.
Yes, indeed. Wow, fascinating. Well, listen, Mark, thanks so much for spending time.
Yeah, that got kind of heavy. Sorry.
No. That's America is the land of millions of stories. So it's very interesting. Well, it's a good thing that in one respect it's sad, but it inspired you. So it part of where you are today. So we're thankful for that. And we're thankful for you participating on the podcast. It's been a great conversation, a lot of good insight. I've really enjoyed it. So maybe we'll have you on again after your next Shingo Award-winning book. Keep up the good work, and we'll be talking.
All right. Well, thank you, Ed. It's always good talking to you, and then thank you for being on my podcast. And come back when the new book is out.
That sounds good. Would love to. Take care, Mark.
You too.
The Operation Science podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. Join the Operation Science Institute at opscience.org. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode. The views expressed by our guests are their own and do not represent their company's views unless specifically stated as such.